example, maintained that God was soon going to intervene in history and overthrow the forces of evil in a cataclysmic act of judgment. That may be why they were celibate, as they were dedicating themselves to the urgency of the moment rather than worried about social life here on earth. It's not at all unlikely, therefore, that Jesus, like the Essenes, was an unmarried celibate. It simply isn't true that this would have been such an oddity in first century Jewish society. Moreover, if Jesus had been married, one would expect to find some trace of it in our historical record, especially among the Gospels, for example, that celebrate the importance of Mary for the development of early Christianity. If Jesus had a relationship with Mary, surely it would have been found its way into the Gospels of the New Testament, but there's nothing there like that at all, which suggests that Jesus probably was an unmarried, celibate Jewish man like the members of the Dead Sea Scroll community. One other strong historical claim made in the Da Vinci Code is that prior to Constantine, Jesus was considered to be a mere mortal, but that he was declared to be the Son of God by a very close vote at the Constantine-called Council of Nicaea. We find this, for example, on page 233 of the Da Vinci Code. This is Lee Teabing giving an explanation. Teabing says, during this fusion of religions, Constantine needed to strengthen the new Christian tradition and held a famous ecumenical gathering known as the Council of Nicaea. At this gathering, Teabing said, many aspects of Christianity were debated and voted upon, including the divinity of Jesus. Until that moment in history, until the Council of Nicaea, Jesus was viewed by his followers as a mortal prophet, a great and powerful man, but a man, nonetheless, a mortal. Jesus' establishment as the Son of God was officially proposed and voted on at the Council of Nicaea, says Teabing. Is this true? It is true that many early Christians did consider Jesus to be immortal. But on the other hand, Jesus was declared to be the Son of God in our very earliest Christian sources centuries before the Council of Nicaea. In the Gospels themselves, the Gospels of the New Testament, Jesus calls himself the Son of God. Just read one passage for you, Matthew chapter 11, verse 27, where Jesus says, "All things have been handed over to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him." Jesus talks about God as his own Father and talks about himself as the Son of God. When Jesus is put on trial in Mark chapter 14, the high priest asks Jesus, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus replies, "I am." Jesus speaks of God as his Father in the Garden of Gethsemane when he prays. He prays, "Abba, Father, take this cup away from me." Jesus calls himself the Son of God and understands himself to be the Son of the Father. All of the Gospel writers consider Jesus to be the Son of God. For example, the very beginning of Mark's Gospel, the title of Mark's Gospel that Mark gave it is, "The Beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God." Later, but well before Constantine, Christians considered Jesus not just to be the Son of God, but in some sense to be divine himself. This happens already within the pages of the New Testament, that there are references to Jesus being divine. For example, the beginning of John's Gospel. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." The passage continues on in verse 14, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have beheld his glory." He goes on and identifies this Word as Jesus Christ. According to John's Gospel, Jesus Christ is God's own Word who's become a human. That's why in John's Gospel, Jesus can declare in chapter 10, verse 30, "I and the Father are one." And at the end of the Gospel, doubting Thomas sees Jesus after his resurrection, and he declares, "My Lord and my God." My point is that in the New Testament itself, people are considering Jesus to be divine. This was not something that was voted on at the Council of Nicaea 300 years later. It becomes a commonplace in the 2nd century that Jesus was divine. The debates then in the 2nd century were precisely over how Jesus could be both human and divine. And all of this is taking place 2 centuries before Constantine. When Constantine came on the scene, Jesus' divinity had already been solved. The big remaining question involved in what way could he be called divine? That is what the Arian controversy was all about in Constantine's day that we talked about in the previous lecture, of how Jesus could be both human and divine given the fact that Christians are calling him divine. My point at this stage is simply that it's wrong to think that the Council of Nicaea voted and for the first time decided that Jesus could be called Son of God. It's claimed in the Da Vinci Code that the non-canonical Gospels describe Jesus' earthly life and that they came to be omitted from the Bible, that these Gospels also described Jesus' marriage to Mary Magdalene. For example, on page 244, Lee Teabing says, "The early church needed to convince the world that the mortal prophet Jesus was a divine being. Therefore, any Gospels that described earthly aspects of Jesus' life had to be omitted from the Bible. Unfortunately for the early editors, one particularly troubling earthly theme kept recurring in these other Gospels, Mary Magdalene. More specifically, her marriage to Jesus Christ." Is this true? Well, to begin with, Jesus as an earthly being actually dominates the Gospels of the New Testament. His earthly life wasn't eliminated from those Gospels. In the Gospels of the New Testament, he is said to be born. He has a real childhood. He's raised Jewish. He becomes an itinerant prophet. He gets hungry and tired. He can suffer. He can bleed. He can die. Jesus is completely human in these books. The non-canonical Gospels, did they portray him as more earthly than that? On the contrary, the non-canonical Gospels more typically portray Jesus in other, more divine terms. According to our earliest sources, both canonical and non-canonical, Jesus did have a close relationship with Mary. But clearly, it's a relationship of discipleship, not a relationship of intimacy. Let me read a couple of these other Gospels in which the relationship of Jesus and Mary is described. One of the very important Gospels is a Gospel that actually is attributed to Mary Magdalene herself, the Gospel of Mary, which was discovered at the end of the 19th century. This is a very interesting Gospel because in this Gospel, we learn that Jesus had revealed secret knowledge to Mary that could be conveyed to his followers that would give them salvation. And the difficulty that the other disciples have is that secret knowledge was given to Mary instead of to one of them. And why is it that a woman gets this knowledge and not a man? Mary stands up and she greets the disciples, and Jesus has just left, and so they're weeping. And she says to them, "Don't weep, don't grieve or be irresolute, for his grace will be entirely with you and will protect you." Peter says to her, "Well, Mary, we know that he revealed truths to you. Tell us, what did he tell you?" And so then Mary gives this revelation of secret knowledge that Jesus had given. When Mary had said this, she fell silent, since it was up to this point that the Savior had spoken with her. But Andrew answered and said to one of the brethren, "Say what you wish to about what she said. I, at least, don't believe that the Savior said this, for certainly these teachings are strange ideas." And then Peter says, "Did Jesus really speak with a woman without our knowledge and not openly?" So this makes Mary weep in turn. And she says to Peter, "Well, my brother Peter, what do you think? Do you think that I thought this up myself in my heart, or that I'm lying about the Savior?" And then Levi comes in and says, Levi says, "Peter, you've always been hot-tempered, but if the Savior made her worthy, who are you indeed to reject her? Surely the Savior knows her very well. That is why he loved her more than us." He loved her more than us. Well, maybe isn't that possibly an indication that he had a special relationship with Mary? There's nothing here about them being married or having children, just that Jesus may have loved Mary more than he loved the male disciples. A similar theme is found in another gospel, the Gospel of Philip, which was discovered in in the Nag Hammadi Library in 1945. In the Gospel of Philip, we have a very interesting passage, which unfortunately, this Gospel of Mary, this Gospel of Philip is one of these documents that was worn out over the years, and so there's holes in the manuscript in places. So there are words missing because there are holes where you look for them. And so but there's this one passage which says that Jesus loved Mary more than all the others, and he used to kiss her on the, and then there's a hole in the manuscript. So we don't know. We don't know where Jesus kissed her. But again, here we have Jesus loving Mary more than all the others. Well, what can we say about Mary Magdalene and Mary Magdalene in relationship to Jesus? Is it true that the Gospel of Mary indicates that Jesus gave instructions to her for carrying on his church after his death? Well, yes, that's said in the Da Vinci Code, and that's comparable to what you get in the Gospel of Mary, the secret knowledge. Is it true that the Gospel of Mary indicates that she was married to Jesus? There's a very peculiar passage in the Da Vinci Code on page 246 in which we have a quotation from the Gospel of Philip. In fact, this one that I was just quoting to you. And it says that the companion of the Savior is Mary Magdalene. Christ loved her more than all the other disciples. Lee Teabing, who's quoting this to the other two, indicates that, as any Aramaic scholar will tell you, the word companion in those days literally meant spouse. So that when it says that Mary was Jesus' companion, it meant spouse. That's a very odd thing to say, that any Aramaic scholar will tell you this, because in fact the Gospel of Philip is not written in Aramaic. It's written in Greek. And the word, it's written in Coptic, the ancient Egyptian language, Coptic. And when it comes to the word companion, it doesn't use the Coptic word companion, it uses a Greek word companion. The Greek word companion means companion. It doesn't mean spouse. So why he talks about Aramaic scholars telling you that it means spouse is rather strange, since that's not what's in the text at all. And is it true that she was pregnant, that Mary was pregnant with Jesus' child at the time of the crucifixion and then fled to France with the help of Jesus' uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, as claimed in the Da Vinci Code? In point of fact, none of these claims has any support in the historical record. Let me start with Mary Magdalene's name. Her given name is Mary. I'm talking about the historical woman herself. Her name was Mary. She's differentiated from the other Marys of the New Testament by an indication that she came from the town Magdala. Now, Magdala is an Aramaic word which means tower, and the town Magdala was called that because there was a large tower in the town. It was a fishing town on the Sea of Galilee, about a mile north of Tiberias, named Magdala because of this famous tower. The town evidently had something of an unsavory reputation. Later scholars claimed that it eventually was destroyed militarily as a punishment by God because of its loose morals. This may have contributed to the old legend that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. As it turns out, there's nothing in the New Testament or in any of the other early Christian Gospels of the first few centuries that indicates at all that Mary was a woman of ill repute. That's a later medieval legend. This legend started in the 6th century when people took there's a story in the Gospels where this woman of ill repute anoints Jesus' feet and wipes his feet with her hair, and the Pharisees get upset because Jesus shouldn't be having this kind of contact with a woman of ill repute. And later, people said, that's Mary Magdalene. Well, the text doesn't say it's Mary Magdalene. In fact, the next story starts talking about Mary Magdalene and introduces her for the first time, suggesting that, which shows that this other woman isn't Mary Magdalene, but that's how you get the tradition of Mary Magdalene being a prostitute, by conflating those two stories. In fact, we have only scant information about Mary from the records of the New Testament. According to Luke, she was one of Jesus' followers from Galilee. We're told that he had cast 7 demons out of her. We're not told what those demons made her do. She supported Jesus from her own wealth, as did some other women, according to Luke 8, chapter 2. She played some significant role in Jesus' last hours. She's said to have been a witness of Jesus' own crucifixion. And even more important, she, either alone or with other women, depending on which gospel you read, is said to have been the first to have discovered Jesus' empty tomb and to have reported to the disciples that Jesus had been raised. So she was quite important. She's the one who discovered the empty tomb. It's difficult to know historically what to make of these claims, as the surviving narratives differ a great deal from one another. If you want to do a comparative exercise sometime, compare what all of the Gospels say about Mary discovering the tomb at the resurrection. It's very hard to know what really happened because these Gospels have different details that